My name is Sari van Poelje. I'm a specialist in business innovation. I fly around the world helping multinationals, family organizations, and startups innovate their business more quickly than they innovate their products. One of the things I do is I coach a lot of leaders and a lot of leadership teams to help and support this process of business innovation. I've been doing that for 33 years, and sometimes I ask myself, what do I really do? And in the first part, we talked about paying attention to silences, but in this part, I'd like to talk about paying attention to stories. So many of the leaders I talk to have a lot of stories. So they tell me about what happened, what they went through, war stories about their leadership, usually with them in the role of the hero, having conquered the world, and sometimes with them in the role of the victim, having suffered from the world. Now, when I listen to stories, I really think about what themes in the story tend to come back. Last week, I had a leader who told me in the first place about his problem of speaking up in meetings. And he said, you know, when I'm in meetings, I'm really good at my job, but I don't really dare to say what I think, especially when there's groups of leaders, higher placed or peers around, mostly males. I find it really hard to talk. And so the feedback I get is, you're great at your job, you're a great manager technically, but we want you to become a leader. And as a leader, you have to speak up. So that's the point he called me as a coach. And I said to him, what kind of story do you have around speaking up? And he said, well, in my job, I remember being an intern in this firm. And the first time I had to give a presentation for the CEO, I sat outside the room. I was really nervous. They called me in. I presented this project. I'd been working on it for months. I was really proud of it. And then after the first 5 sentences, the CEO looked up from what he was writing and he said, Sonny, you're really good, but go do your homework. And he sent me out. And at that moment, I concluded, I really feel very uncomfortable speaking up. And I said, oh, that's interesting, you know, and really painful. And he said, yeah, it was kind of painful. And I said, what's the other story before that about speaking up? And he told me many stories, but one of the other stories he told me was, when I was at school, at the American school, we had to present every week. We called that show and tell. Every week the kids would come in and have to say something about what happened to them the week before, or they would show something, or they would take pictures with them. And every time I stood up, I think I was really a nerd at that time as well. And I stood up and I told kids about biology and my fascination for facts and science. And all these kids really hated my stories. They booed me. And at that point, I concluded, speaking up is really not the thing for me. And I said, oh, do you have any memories before that? And he said, yeah, my mother's a university professor. My father's a doctor. And I used to speak up at home, but it was never good enough. My mother always corrected me. And I said, do you have any idea about her definition of success? He said, no, not really. I said, well, those kind of stories are really important also to figure out what you want with your life. Oh, I'm going to interview my mother. I said, yeah, that's a good idea. So he went back home, he interviewed his mother, and he said, Mom, what is your definition of success? And she said, oh, son, I went through so much in my life. I had to prove myself as a woman, as a professor at the university. And my only definition of success is be good at your job. Speak up and be good at your job. And my client looked at her and he said, Mom, I really love you. And for me, success is love. Being loved and loving my family. He came back and told me this story, and it was wonderful to see. His whole face had changed. In exploring these stories, he'd realized that actually the roots of his not speaking up came from much deeper and much earlier. And he'd inherited, in a way, his mother's ideas of success and his mother's struggle to prove herself. But it really had nothing to do with him at that point. This is the reason that I pay attention to stories, and I think you should too.